Several years ago, I was in a committee meeting, and a guy in the committee, Bob, got up after the committee meeting was over, and he was obviously in pain. And so I said, Bob, what's going on? Did you hurt your back, like at the gym or something? And he said, actually, no, it's a longer story. I'm an amateur photographer, and so I love nature. So I went down to Sequoia Canyon, Kings Canyon, Sequoia National Park in Central California, and I hiked to the top of a waterfall, and I was shooting pictures from the top of the waterfall, and I got out into the water a little bit, and I discovered that actually it was a pretty slippery bunch of rocks up on top there, and I got pulled away from the shore, and I went over the waterfall. And so I had this terrible accident, and I was able actually to bob to the surface and get over to the shore and crawl out. And when I got to the shore, sopping wet on my hands and knees, a couple of tourists came up to me and said, "Hey, did you see some guy just went over the waterfall?" And I said, "Yeah, that was me." And at that point, Bob said he went into shock, actually, and they had to send in actually a medical helicopter to evacuate him and bring him out. My first question was, well, did you get your camera back at all those photos? Actually, it wasn't my first question, but I did sort of wonder. You must have had some great photos. But anyway, so Bob here we have a crisis that's occurred. And of course, the first thing is Bob himself is a victim. He's got a terrible health crisis. His back is broken, and that's got to be taken care of. The Park Service also is probably really nervous about getting sued, about whether they're responsible and liable in some way, so they're concerned. The Park Service is concerned about its reputation as a safe place for families to take vacation and hike those trails, so they've got something like that to worry about. And so the response basically to a situation like that is to take care of the victim, and then also to get the lawyers busy to try to protect the finances and get the PR department busy to spin the situation in the most favorable way possible. And this is what we would call damage control. And in many respects, this is the way business ethics has been operating for the past several years. We focus on very difficult crisis kinds of problems like this. The Exxon Valdez oil tanker goes aground. The Ford Explorers with Firestone tires are rolling over and people are getting killed. Enron manipulates a power crisis in California. Walmart relies on government programs to subsidize its low-wage employees. Arthur Andersen cooks the books for Enron. Government officials for themselves misappropriate funds. Nike uses sweatshop labor. A CEO sexually harasses his vice president. A big pharmaceutical company is promoting an unsafe drug. This is the kind of thing that we focus on. It's a growth industry. Lots of people are going over the waterfalls. Even whole companies are going over the waterfalls. And the business ethics industry and the compliance industry, we show up to try to help deal with them. But is this really what ethics is all about? Is it just something about building more hospitals in order to provide emergency services and control the damages? Is it more about more mandatory ethics training, looking at problem cases with annual online training programs with individuals looking at screens, choosing multiple choice from multiple choice answers? The problem with this is that we're not really addressing the sources of those problems at all. What's wrong, the bad stuff, is setting the agenda for the way we approach ethics. It's negative, it's narrow, it's reactive, it's really mostly about litigation and penal system avoidance. If we become experts in anything, we become experts in unethical behavior. It does nothing to reduce the bad stuff. So what can we do that would be a step better than this? What would keep people from going over the waterfall? In other words, to minimize these problems from occurring. Well, one thing we could do is we can improve the signage at the top of the waterfall. We could try to create a set of rules and hope that people would comply with these. This is analogous to the role of codes of ethics in businesses and workplaces, is to create a code of ethics and train people, teach them what the rules are, and hope that they'll obey. Now, this, of course, does require a surveillance and ethics police force to enforce this, so they don't enforce themselves. We know that good signage actually near waterfalls or streets or in businesses is an essential kind of step. But signs by themselves, rules by themselves, don't deter anybody. Codes and rules often are perceived, especially in business, as negative, as self-serving on the part of the business owners, as abstract, as detached from real life in the trenches. Often they feel like and are created by some external authority, and they don't command respect. So far, we have two kinds of workplace ethics. One kind of workplace ethics is the ethics of damage control and emergency response, mopping up the blood and the damage from crises down at the base of the waterfall. And the other is an ethics of rules and warnings. And so we could say, how does faith typically get related to this kind of workplace ethics? Well, I think there are two things that Christians have insisted on that I think are really important. On the one hand, Christians typically insist that ethics is important. It's not just about the bottom line, but we insist it is important to try to do the right thing in the workplace and in the business world. And the second thing that we do is we often are the people who say, you know what, we can't just make it up all as we go along, but there is something more than just the relative and subjective kind of approach to values and ethics. There is something at a fundamental level that's absolute. So that's great. This is all important, and yet I think there's something more that can be done than just that kind of ethics and that kind of message, and that is to build fences. So something more than just a sign is to build a fence, to create a real barrier and a disincentive to danger. So we don't just create more rules, but we actually create structures. So what this means is, of course, in waterfalls, it's building fences to keep photographers away from dangerous currents. But in business, it means things like this: designing offices that have lots of windows so that people won't be doing things behind those windows without being observed. It means in business creating policies that maybe two parties need to sign on a contract or a big check instead of just letting one person be tempted to do that all by themselves. It means if you're Jesus, maybe you're going to send your disciples out 2 by 2 instead of 1 by 1. It means also that there's not just external structure, there's internal structure. So we hire people for character and not just for the technical skills that they have. Well, culture, building a culture in a business is more than just fence building, which seems kind of like a negative thing. But the point is that our behavior in the workplace isn't just guided by fear of horrible results from catastrophes. It isn't just guided by the rules that people tell us. Our behavior is guided by structures, policies, habits, and character. But there's an even better way to approach this kind of thing. And that is to create some kind of positive attraction to lure people away from the temptation to engage in that kind of behavior. So here's a picture of a platform that's been created where actually you get better pictures of the waterfall than if you were stepping up there close to the top. It's to not just tell people stay away from the top, but come over here, invite them over here. Or in the most amazing example of this, you have the platform over the Grand Canyon, which is a terrifying thought just to visit it in some ways. But if you're looking for a thrill and great pictures, this is where you're going to go. So it's a station. It's something that is more than just mopping up the damage. It's more than just announcing new rules. It's about creating an attractive, positive alternative. Now, my waterfall analogy isn't perfect, but it points to the role of an inspiring mission in a business or a workplace. The point is to create a mission that will draw people and shape their behavior. So what is the mission or purpose of this organization that will get people out of bed in the morning and cause them or draw them to eagerly to bring their best self to work? What is the positive change that we can make in the lives of our customers and clients and communities that will really inspire us to bring our best self to work? Well, it certainly will not just be moving money from my customers' pockets to my own. That's not going to do it. Love of money isn't going to get the job done. There's there's a place for profit for sure, but greed and avarice are not going to get the job done. But what we're doing is we're flipping workplace ethics on its head. So not problems at the end of the pipe, but rather mission and purpose at the front end are going to drive the ethics process from damage control to mission control. So the most important move in building a more ethical organization or individual mission for a career is to figure out why am I doing this, and what is my purpose and mission? What's the change that I'm trying to make through my company or through my own career? And the most important ethical leadership move by any CEO or leader is to be the guardian and the herald of that kind of mission and purpose. The second thing that happens after identifying the mission is to create a culture that is in alignment with that mission. The mission is what's going to motivate and leverage and specify the core values that we need to embed in the culture. So many companies, their core values are kind of randomly chosen instead of being intentionally identified as the characteristics that will help achieve the mission. Now, in addition to a culture, what we also need is what I call a crap detection system. We need a garbage disposal because we live in a broken world and we are going to have trouble. We need to be able to hold up that stop sign. We need to have that emergency room. It's just that can't be the whole thing. It's got to be a subsidiary part of it. And then in addition to that, even more than saying no to certain practices and identifying and stopping problems, what we need is to focus on the positive role of ethics codes in telling people this is how we treat our customers, not just do not do it this way or you'll get in trouble. Now, what I'm describing here actually is not something new and revolutionary. This is actually the classic traditional way of approaching ethics. It's really getting off track to do the postmodern approach, which is to focus on a random series of problem cases and let those problems drive our agenda. That's a very postmodern kind of approach. And the modern approach before that was to try to find universal scientific rules that are abstract and apply to all cases, but that's been shown to be a false and dead-end road on its own. The mission approach and the culture approach, that's the classical way that ethics has been approached and what we need to recover, I believe, in our own time. Plato and Aristotle taught ethics that way. Aristotle starts his book by saying, the good is that at which everything aims. It's about figuring out what we're aiming at, and then we can figure out what the virtues are. And even more to the point, the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments, the first commandment is all about who's going to be God here. And if we don't get that figured out, the rest of that about violence or fidelity, all those things is not going to work. So the Bible sets it up this way too. It's not abstract rules. It's about a mission and a community and a culture. So where are we as Christians on workplace ethics? Well, as we've pointed out, we care. We reinforce the importance of ethics. And we insist that it's not just relative and subjective, and all of that is great. But where do we need to go? What still needs to get done? Well, I think, first of all, it does start with a shift in overall approach from a reactive, negative damage control to a proactive, positive mission control that puts mission and culture on the front burner. And then after that, we pursue a much deeper, richer biblical and theological insight into each aspect of this approach. So, for example, when it comes to mission, I think that as Christians, we have something very rich and deep to share about the kind of mission that will get people out of bed in the morning. And I think it has to do with the fact that every man, woman, and child is made in the image of a creator and a redeemer and has that in their DNA. And we need to challenge that in our people to create, to be innovative, as well as to be helpful. And I think when it comes to our culture, we have insights from the Beatitudes on how we create a healthy culture. When it comes to our troubleshooting method, we have texts like Matthew 18 and Romans 12, which teach us ways of overcoming evil with good. And when it comes to our codes of ethics, we have amazing insights from the Decalogue. So the businesses and workplaces of our era are crying out for help in building ethically healthy operations. Biblical faith provides a rich gold mine of insights that we've only begun to tap in the Faith at Work movement when it comes to workplace ethics. That's what still needs to get done. Thank you.
So David, you've taught this ethics to college kids, to people in the workplace, to people in the seminary. How do you teach the Beatitudes or the Ten Commandments to people who don't have a faith in God?
You know, people have mentioned the name Jacques Ellul around here, and Jacques Ellul was part of a theological tradition that in some respects accentuated the difference between the revelation of God and, let's say, any sort of natural revelation. I actually have come to believe, the more I've worked with business people and working place people, the more I've come to believe that actually there is a law written on the hearts of the people out there in the community. And so if I was to talk to people about worshiping the Creator and Sustainer and Redeemer, I don't know they'd understand that language. But when I say I believe in your people, there is something in their DNA that makes them respond to an opportunity to be innovative and to build something useful and beautiful, or there's something in their DNA that makes them feel better about working here if they can show that they're actually healing somebody, helping somebody, fixing some problem. You know what? They all agree. And eventually someone will say, how did you come to focus on those two themes? And I'll say, well, you know, I've read a lot of business literature, but, you know, I have to tell you, the truth is I've been teaching Christian ethics, theological ethics for years, and that's what we think God is. We think God, and we believe that every man, woman, and child, no matter what their religion is, they were made in the image and likeness of that Creator and Redeemer. And so I go in the back door. And the same thing with the themes of each of the Beatitudes. When it comes to being poor in spirit, I talk about being humble and teachable and open, and show how Jim Collins in Good to Great talks about those characteristics and exemplifies them, by the way, through Coleman Mockler, who is part of my the endowment for my thing. So I think there's a language that we can find that enables us to communicate in a positive way. And I can't tell you how many of my MBA students or the companies where I've consulted will come up to me and say, you know, I love this stuff. Where did you get this? And then I tell them.